And we're back here, SwamiLee's Sports Talk. I'm SwamiLee.
I'm Mellow Mike.
Well, Mike, what are we talking about today?
You tell me.
You know, Mike, you had a chance. He had a chance. He could have come up with a topic, any topic in the world, but he just couldn't do it. He leads me with my brilliant mind to come up with a topic for you guys. And here it is. Are you ready for this? Here we go. Let's talk about the Phillies' pathetic first-round draft picks from 1965 until today. Mike, you can start. What is one of the worst draft picks that you can think of?
Well, I'm just going to state the obvious and go with their 1989 draft pick, Mr. Jeff Jackson.
Of course you do. Yes, everybody knows my feelings about Jeff Action Jackson. What a lot of people don't realize about Jeff Jackson is the Phillies wanted Roger Salkeld, and that was who they were targeting. When the Mariners took Salkeld, they were screwed. And of course, then being they're a horrible franchise, they would just go out and pick the least talented player in the draft. But in their defense, that whole draft stunk. So, I mean, if you look at it, aside from Frank Thomas, you've got almost no talent. Chuck Knobloch, Tyler Houston, the pinch hitter, former Philly also, Ben McLongball. That's about the extent of it. Okay, well, my turn. Let's see. I could pick so many of them. Let's go with that Joe Savery.
That was a pretty tasty pick, don't you think?
Joe Savery, the guy who, did he come up as an outfielder, or did he determine he would be an outfielder after being a pitcher? This guy, what was up with Joe Savery?
On his best day, he was just shy of mediocre.
I think you're being very nice to Mr. Savery. He'll be very happy to hear that, believe me when I tell you. Who's next, Mike?
Well, how about that? Wasn't Pat Combs a first-round pick?
Pat Combs was a first-round pick. Pat Combs was supposed to be a stud.
And for several games, he was.
And not long after that, Pat Combs was out of baseball. Because why? Because he was a Phillies first-round draft pick. And as always, they all stink.
Well, here's another one who had his moments. He wasn't a complete and total and utter bust. Wasn't rhymes with Combs, Wayne Gomes?
Wayne Gomes had old Dominion. Wayne Gomes was, I don't know why you take a relief pitcher in the first round, because that's really what Wayne Gomes was from day one, was a relief pitcher. Nice kid. I met him at the Phillies Carnival, late 90s. But it was not good. I mean, you can tell they're not good because no other team wanted them afterwards. It's not like, okay, he stunk in Philly, went somewhere else, like that Gavin Floyd, and had a couple good years. Gavin Floyd, Phillies first-round pick, traded to the White Sox, won double-digit games at least once, maybe more. Terrible. They're terrible. They can't draft to save their lives.
But obviously, in Gavin Floyd's case, since he had success elsewhere, the problem wasn't so much the drafting as the development.
Well, they did give him, I think, 3 appearances, the Phillies, before they gave up on him. So, they gave him a fair shot, It's amazing how this team does it. It was like their center field position last year. I'm not saying any of those guys are any good, but they literally gave him 20 at-bats. And after 20 at-bats, they're done. That was it. You're out. We're going to get somebody else in there. We'll take our first-round pick from 3 years ago, give him 20 at-bats. When he doesn't hit well, give our other first-round pick 20 at-bats. When he doesn't hit well, we'll go back to Odubel.
And what you're saying raises a question, which is no doubt a topic for another day, but is Joe Girardi really that good a manager, or is success based on the fact that he inherited a stacked team from Joe Torre?
He pitched. He played. He managed well for the Marlins also. So keep that in the back of your mind.
Well, I remember that one season.
But that's more than one season that the Phillies have had. So, and he took a team without much of a roster compared to the Yankee teams. I could have managed the Yankee teams to World Series. They should be firing these guys for not getting them to the World Series with those rosters. But, so that's a good question. And I'll tell you right now, no playoffs this year, no Joe Girardi next year. I'm on that one. I'll tell you that right now.
Well, then we'll be saying goodbye to Joe Girardi in about 6 months.
I would disagree. I think 88 wins will get them to the World Series. Let's get back on topic. And let's talk about that Trey McCall,
If I remembered him, I'd be happy to talk about him.
which is pretty much my point. He was a catcher that they drafted in the mid-'80s, and nobody heard of him. Or how about that Chad McConnell?
At least I remember the name. Barely.
He failed miserably, like all other Phillies prospects failed miserably. Chad McConnell failed. He was an outfielder. He was indeed.
Now, wasn't one of the mainstays, at least, of their World Series team in '08, a first-round pick?
Yes, they did have 3 or 4 successful first-round picks. They had Pat Burrell. I mean, he may not have been a Hall of Famer. He was successful. They had Cole Hamels. Again, not a Hall of Famer, but successful. Greg Luzinski, I believe, was a first-round pick. Successful.
J.D. Drew?
I actually give them a pass for that. So we're not even going to talk about J.D. Drew. We'll give them a pass for that. That was just a bad situation with a low-class human being. So we're just going to move past the J.D. Drew situation and move on.
Well, before we do, I have one question.
Who might that?
Was the low-class human being the draft pick or the agent, or were there actually 2 low-class human beings?
Well, the agent's running the whole thing. But the draft pick said, he went along with it. And of course, they said, you can make money if you do it this way. And he did. That man stole more money from Major League Baseball than any other player that I can think of. Okay? He drew over, do you know this? J.D. Drew knocked in 100 runs one time. Do you know how much money J.D. Drew made in the Major Leagues?
9 figures.
Oh yeah, more than, he was in somewhere between 100 and 200 million dollars. He knocked in 100 runs one time. Think about that for a minute. How insane the next Mickey Mantle in my rear. So let's get back to that Scott Munninghoff. Tell me you remember Scott Munninghoff.
I'm trying to, and my memory's just running off.
I believe he was part of that deal that brought in Bo Diaz. I believe he was traded to Cleveland in the Bo Diaz trade. So at least he brought them something.
Well, yeah, he brought them. Didn't he? That many. He brought them the starting catcher on their '83 pennant team.
That's correct. That's correct. The amount of the Adam Hazleys of this world, I mean, once again, they just gave up on Adam Hazley. Now, maybe it was a good decision. I'm not a talent scout, believe me. But they used the number 8 pick in the draft on him, and I believe it was 2018, so it was only 3-4 years ago. They've given up on him already. Mickey Moniak, if you watched us a couple weeks ago, I specifically said Mickey Moniak wasn't even going to make the team. He then started batting about 600 with 5 home runs after I made that comment, so maybe I'm the reason. Until Moniak got hurt, of course, and that, of course, ruined everything. But it's unbelievable. And they just drafted those two young pitchers over the last 2 years, Abel and Painter. I'm just waiting for them to have Tommy John surgery, whether it's this week, next month, or a year from now. You know they're both going to have Tommy John surgery. How is an organization this bad?
Well, it's a combination of things, like we talked about. Bad scouting, foolish philosophy, and poor ultimate decision-making.
And they're guilty of all of them. Let me tell you something. Remember the year they drafted Adrian Cardenas? Now, he was a second-round pick. He wasn't a first-round pick. But he was their first pick. Or the year they drafted, what was his name? Well, they drafted Eric Vallant.
Eric Vallant, 95.
He was taken with a compensation pick for J.D. Drew.
So that would be 98 or 99.
I believe it would be 98, if I remember correctly. You know, he was a failure. How about that Jesse Biddle?
Now, how much was he really a failure, and how much it was because of concussions and other injuries?
He was a guy that got hit by hail or frozen rain or something along those lines. So his luck was pretty bad also. He and Mickey Moniak should discuss bad luck.
I'm a little shocked that you're going after Biddle, because I thought you were a Biddle supporter.
I was until,
so you're...
Until he got hit by a giant piece of frozen rain.
So your rant against him is more than a Biddle surprising.
In the immortal words of the Pet Shop Boys, what did I do to deserve this? But on a serious note, we could keep going. Remember Mike Anderson?
I do.
He was a first-round pick. Two stints with the Phillies. Two separate stints with the Phillies. Nice fifth outfielder. No big deal. It's amazing how bad one team can draft. And I don't, for the life of me, understand how it's not like, okay, we'll say that, for example, Lee Thomas can't draft. Okay, that's great. Well, Lee Thomas is only the GM for a half dozen years or so. There's 50-some years of draft. Okay, Matt Klentak can't draft. Okay, there's still 40-some years left. How is it that no GM in this organization can draft? That's what I want to know.
Well, here's a question for you that relates to that, and it's probably a question for another day, but I'm curious. For all those drafts where their first-round pick was so ridiculously bad that they probably should have known it at the time, in how many of those did they come back in the second or the fourth or the eighth or the 20th round and get with a great pick?
Have you been drinking before this video? The Phillies, if you take away the Jimmy Rollins, Chase Utley, Ryan Howard, those there's 5 or 6 guys taken in that span of time. If you take that away, you tell me these huge names the Phillies have drafted in the 2nd, the 4th, the 8th, the 12th round, okay, to make up for bad first-round picks. You're not going to be able to because there's a smattering of them, but there's not a consistency. They're not the Dodgers who have 3 new top prospects every year. It's not existing. Okay. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, think about it. Give me some names. I want the names.
Well, I don't think Larry Bow was a first-round pick.
1968 was it, or something like that? Okay. Keep going. Oh yeah, of course you could say that. Michael Jack Schmidt. But even then, okay, great. Now 5 years later, you've got Mike Schmidt. Okay, let's keep on moving. How many more years do you think of the next guy?
Well, wasn't Carlos Ruiz a draft pick, or was he signed as a
Carlos
foreign player?
Ruiz was a middle-of-the-range, mediocre catcher that was popular here. Look at his numbers. He's like Darren Dalton. Darren Dalton was not a good player. He had maybe 3 good seasons in his major league career.
Actually, 2.
I know it's sacrilegious to say negative about Carlos Ruiz, and he was a nice little player. But if you're trying to use him to prove that the Phillies had good draft picks, you are wrong, okay?
Well,
Keep
where do you put Bruce Ruffin in the pantheon of draft picks?
Bruce Ruffin, 1986, 9 wins, 4 losses, around a 2.49 ERA, give or take a tenth of a point. Bruce Ruffin had 1 good half season. He was the pitcher that was going to replace Steve Carlton, the left-hander. And of course, 1 season later, Bruce Ruffin was done. So again, he doesn't count.
How about Juan Samuel?
That Juan Samuel had a great 1984 campaign. He had 702 at-bats in his rookie year. He stole all those bases. He had at the time the rookie record for bases until Vince Coleman took over. So yes, he was. You got points for Ron Samuel. But again, keep going. My man was Jeff Stone. Everybody knows that Jeff Stone was my guy. But Jeff Stone had 1 half a season. He batted .362, and he could still third base standing up. That's how fast that guy was. But that was it. I want guys who had extended careers. I don't want guys that have, even Juan Samuel. If you look at his numbers, he only had a couple good seasons here. And when he left here, his career was just about over. Okay,
That's true.
Give me a guy. Give me a Ron Say. If you want to give an example, give me a Ron Say. Give me a Dave Lopes. They're not Hall of Famers, but they're the next rung down.
Well, we don't have a Penguin for you, but how about Brandon Duckworth?
Who again stunk, aside from a couple good appearances.
Scott Rowland?
There you go. This is 1 point for Mike because
Only 1?
Scott Rowland would qualify for this. That is correct. But see how much trouble you're having coming up with guys. Ricky Jordan. We all thought Ricky Jordan was going to be the guy. Ricky Jordan had 2 or 3 good seasons. That's not what I'm talking about. I want a guy that even if he didn't play for the Phillies for all 5 to 10 years as a starter, I want guys that would be like him, like a Rowland. Give me, remember Remember that Kevin Stocker?
Sure.
He was good for 2 seasons.
And of course, he bought Bobby Abreu,
And
who,
that-
for all his shortcomings, had some value.
Now, Bobby Abreu is the second tier right below Hall of Fame. No doubt about it.
The key word being below.
That's correct. But you can go back, if you want to go back to 1970-something, Rufus.
Dick Ruthven.
Exactly right. There was a guy who deserves this conversation. Okay.
How about Tommy Underwood?
No, Tommy Underwood was a mediocre pitcher for,
Okay, Larry Christensen then.
LC was very good. But again, you're shooting back to 1971. Okay? See how much trouble you're having coming up with anybody recent times? Aside from those few players that we're talking about.
Speaking of going back that far, I think what we should really do is limit ourselves to the current ownership group, which was what, 1981 or 82 when they bought the Carpenters.
1981. And this is and again, this is a topic for another time as you discuss all the players they traded for nothing. And here's one for you. I got one for you. You ready?
Of course.
How about that Ryan D. Sandberg? But we're not getting into that right now. But he's another example of a player that wasn't a first-round pick that turned into a player.
Same vein, Julio Franco.
Yes, he would also qualify for that. That is correct. And that's what I'm talking about. A player that had an extensive career. He didn't even have to have it at the Phillies. They had to have an extensive career. And we're having trouble finding players. And they had to be good. I don't want to talk about Kyle Kendrick, who was a 5th starter on a good day for 5 seasons. I'm talking about guys that had an impact on the career. And there's very few of them. And that's how sad and pathetic this organization is. On that note, Mike, I think we're running out of time. Any last thoughts?
Well, I'm only sad that we didn't get to talk about that Mike Rogozinski before the show ended.
Just so you know, when my parents had a business in Cape May, Mike Rogozinski came to my parents' store.
And it's sad to say that that was his biggest achievement in the Delaware Valley.
I would have loved to have met him. So, Mike, if you happen to be watching this, I'm sorry I didn't get to meet you there because he was, I loved his name. It was more than anything else. I loved his name. Well, we're trying to wrap it up here. SwamiLee's Sports Talk. Appreciate you tuning in. We'll check you out next time around. For the moment, I'm SwamiLee.
I'm Mellow Mike.
We'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.